Today's member spotlight is with Peter Davey. Some of you may know him online as the Payments Jedi. He's a senior VP at the Clearinghouse, head of product innovation, and in fact, he had a similar role at Capital One, I believe, for 10 years, head of payment strategy, innovation, and industry. He tells us the Clearinghouse story in today's spotlight. He's a wealth of information. We talk about innovation, digital transformation, of course, payments and RTP, as well as the long-term systemic change that has been brought about by COVID. So let's jump in and let's enjoy. So Peter, you and I were just speaking about the Clearinghouse and it's how it's a 166-year-old company. It just blows me away. Give me the Clearinghouse story. I'd love to hear it again for our FSI members.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lance, for having me and talking about some of the cool things that are happening with the Clearinghouse and across the industry as a whole. The Clearinghouse is a very interesting story. As you mentioned, we're 166 years old. We're the oldest company that not a lot of people know about, which I think is a good thing when you talk about clearing and settling $2 trillion a day. It's always good not to be in the paper when you do that much money and that much transfer. We provide a bunch of different products to the financial services industry as a cost recovery model. So, our whole goal is to make enough money to be able to keep the lights on. And to innovate and drive new developments across the industry. But the work that we do is really on behalf of the industry, and everything that we've developed as an organization has been a response to an industry need. So when you think about the beginning of the Clearinghouse, which is really based in check exchange, it was the need for some central group to be able to allow for the secure exchange of checks and money together, and to be able to do that in a safe and sound manner. And this was even before the Federal Reserve had even been thought of. We were a bunch of years before that. We then continued on with the path of innovation, developed capabilities for the ACH network when that was still in its infancy. We then continued on with looking at the opportunity around wires or large dollar transfers between financial institutions. We created a proprietary netting algorithm that allowed for us to keep more liquidity in the system during the day, so financial institutions didn't have to bring as much to the table. We were one of the first in check image exchange in terms of driving that forward and trying to drive the industry toward more electronification. And then obviously we developed the first real-time payment system, or actually the first payment system in the last 40 years available to every financial institution in the US. And the impetus for that was really couplefold. One, in 2012, our supervisory board, the owners of the Clearinghouse, asked, should we have something different than what we have today for being able to move money and to affect commerce? As we look at a digital age, do the systems that we have today work? And we did a couple of years research on that and realized that it really didn't. It really wasn't going to facilitate commerce in a digital era. So we embarked on the opportunity to look at what we could do. About that same time, the Federal Reserve set up their Faster Payments Task Force. And in that Faster Payments Task Force, we were a member of that task force. We actually had a leadership position on the task force. Our owners decided that we should build out a new real-time payment system in 2014. In fact, in November 2014, they approved the build out of the system. The top 25 financial institutions in the country funded that system to be able to be built on behalf of the entire U.S. economy. And then we went to market in November of 2017 with a brand new payment system that was built for a digital age. And we'll get into a little bit more of that, but I think the importance of this is that the Clearinghouse has been in the forefront of innovation in responding to what the industry needs for a very, very long time, over 166 years. And I think that well positions us to be able to continue to lead innovation for the future.
So Peter, you mentioned that the other tools weren't necessarily meant for a digital age. So tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me the RTP story. Let's go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned to you previously that one of the folks that I like to listen to, Chris Skinner, talked about the fact that financial institutions were built for an industrial era in a paper-based economy. And when you think about that paper-based economy, almost everything we've done as financial institutions, even the advent of one of the first electronic payment systems with ACH, was built on batch-based, paper-based processing. So as you think and move toward a digital age, what you really have is a gap in terms of the way processes work and the way in which people are able to react to that. And when we thought about what was needed for a digital age in the payment system, we knew that we needed something that was responsive, something that provided for transparency. So we built something that was 100% assured delivery and response, which means that there is no doubt as to when the transaction gets there because there's a response back to tell you that the other party received it. I think the other piece that we looked at as well is how can we move beyond just a payment into contextual commerce, which really starts with being able to present an invoice through something like a request for payment, being able to ask information back using like a request for information message on the network, and then being able to acknowledge that you actually received the payment and posted it the right way using acknowledgement messages. So, with the rich communication mechanism that we built within the RTP network, it really was meant to mirror what we expect as human beings in our everyday lives. It's the reason why we choose UPS over USPS. It's the reason that we choose iMessage or Google Hangouts over SMS today. It's because we have that human desire for immediate response. And then if you take that one step further in terms of what are the needs of businesses and individuals across the world, it's really about figuring out how you give them control, transparency, and security around everything they do. So wrapping those things into a new payment system was very important to us. And that's really what we launched in November of 2017 and have been driving the industry to adopt. I think one of the challenges, though, with adoption of these new technologies, kind of going back to Chris Skinner's point, is that we're not geared as financial institutions in a pure digital society. Now, there's a lot of really good neobanks that have started up, or what we call digital banks nowadays, that are geared a little bit more toward that. And those are the ones that have actually truly ran to the real time payments network and tried to implement these tools because it really fits into the business model well. But the rest of the 10,000 financial institutions out there have a lot of legacy built into them, which means that in reality, when you're moving to become a digital bank or you're moving to become a digital first company, which is much more than just a front end, it means that you're re architecting the entire enterprise, and that takes time. So the journey that most financial institutions are on is not a 6 month journey to get onto RTP, although it may only take them 6 months to get onto the system and to get everything ready. It's all of the stuff that comes before that so that they can really take advantage of these new tools and capabilities for their customers.
So, I mean, it sounds like there's already a network there, there's already solutions and tools, and yet I hear about this system or program that's about to come called FedNow. How does that fit into this whole puzzle?
Yeah, so interesting enough, when the Faster Payments Task Force was around, at that particular time, the Federal Reserve had responded back to the industry saying that they thought that the private market should be able to address the needs of developing a new payment system. In terms of what they were planning to do, which was nothing at the time, when we actually put our system in front of the Faster Payments Task Force, we met all of the 36 criteria that they had set out for what a real-time payment system should be in the US. So we felt pretty good about what we were bringing to market. I do think the Fed felt a little bit of pressure from some of the smaller and community banks and credit unions that they needed to do something because, to be quite honest, they've been a competitor to us in all of the different payment systems that we run today. Now, that said, they've also been a great collaborator with us as well. So I think, when we look at some of the other payment systems and how they work, we've shared a lot of information with them, and we continue to share a lot of information with them, even about what we've built in the real-time payment system. I think the Fed is responding to what they believe is a need in the industry to have another system that operates and provides for some competitive differentiators. The reality is, though, we are driving fairly quickly toward, I would say, I hate the term ubiquity, but we are driving toward reach. We already, within the last 3 years of the system being up and running, we're already at about 57% of the entire U.S. deposit base that can receive an RTP transaction. We've worked with core providers to connect and now provide for reach of over 70% of the U.S. deposit base, really with a lot of those banks just having to push a button if they're core hosted by one of those service providers. And the last service provider that we're working with will actually bring close to around 80% reach in the first quarter of 2021. So we're moving fairly aggressively and quickly. I think the long pole in the tent, though, for a lot of financial institutions ends up being the send side functionality and developing new products and services that can really take advantage of these messages. I think as the Fed's concerned, they have a timeline to come into the market in 2023 or 2024. We're already in a digital society. The time of need is now. And I think a lot of financial institutions are realizing that. But as I mentioned before, it's not a quick fix for most financial institutions. They really have to rethink about how they're going to approach their customer tools and services, and ultimately how they're going to take advantage of all these new rich capabilities they have. Because, a real-time credit push, valuable, but not as valuable as some of the other things that have been built into this network.
So Peter, you're the Senior Vice President, Head of Product Innovation at the Clearinghouse. That sounds like an absolutely ideal role. Give us a snapshot into your day-to-day, and then let's talk at a high level about innovation, maybe some innovations that recently occurred, some innovations that are just right around the corner, and then where we're headed 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, this job is a great job for me. I like to be able to think of new opportunities for the industry. And, in my role at the Clearinghouse, I get to work with some of the top financial institutions. I get to work with the top trade groups across other types of financial institutions. And I get to be able to think larger than just a single bank. Ultimately, thinking about everything that we can do to transform the payments industry, the banking industry, and look at other opportunities. So anything from working in and looking at how we can actually standardize APIs for data access with fintechs and financial institutions, to looking at how we can actually drive better adoption of digital invoicing across the economy. There is a need for people to help innovate at a much larger scale, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do that on an everyday basis. A lot of it has to do with collaboration, working with industry groups, looking at what the opportunities are, and ensuring that what we're bringing to market, whether either as a product or as an advocate for other financial institutions, how be them large or small, is a very important aspect of what I do on a regular basis. Some really interesting things that we've done recently that I think really show how we're advocating across the entire industry is when we looked at the opportunity for APIs, we said, hey, we can't just do this as financial institutions. We have to look at this from a fintech standpoint. We have to look at this from a core provider standpoint. We have to make sure that the smaller financial institutions, credit unions, and community banks all have the ability to access these same opportunities. So we did a couple of things that were foundational in our connected banking space. We actually worked with the industry to start up a new entity called Financial Data Exchange. They are working on the standardization of APIs across financial institutions and fintechs for data sharing purposes and potentially even for payment services in the long term. Additionally, we actually developed a model contract that financial institutions could use with fintechs to be able to provide them capabilities of what was best practices across the industry to make sure that both parties could actually reach agreement in a much quicker fashion. Because what we were finding is that the majority of financial institutions were taking between 18 to 24 months to negotiate a contract with a fintech, a financial technology company. And then lastly, we looked at what were the opportunities to create tools across the industry. And this was an area where we said, okay, hey, we don't necessarily need to build something out, but why don't we make an investment in a strategic company called Akoya that allowed for data access sharing platform. And again, I think it shows you the ability for us to say, hey, we don't have to build everything, we can actually partner or we can invest to be able to do that. And I think the advocacy thing is such a huge thing. Another innovation that I'm really excited about is we looked at the RTP network maturing. One of the big issues that we've seen across the entire industry in terms of electronic payment adoption is the lack of data. And while RTP, I think in general, provides for a greater amount of data to be exchanged between parties, one of the core challenges you've had is replacing that paperclip or staple in a check to a remittance, especially for larger companies and even mid-sized companies out there. So there's something within the RTP message, both the request for payment and payment message, called an electronic address field. So what we did is we looked at that and said, how could we use that to digitally exchange documents that allow for parties to be able to do that? And to that end, we are working to bring some new capabilities to market that would allow for financial institutions and their customers to exchange digital documents as opposed to having to exchange just addenda records or potentially disrupt their day by sending things through email, snail mail, or fax, which, by the way, all of those things still happen today. So, we're able to look at these things and try to figure out from a systemic point of view, how can we solve some of these large problems that exist that are really driving a deficiency across the entire ecosystem, not just financial institutions, but their customers.
That's amazing, Peter. You talk about all of these impressive innovations, and clearly the technology is there, but let's talk about adoption for a minute. What is keeping companies from adopting some of these technologies and innovations that are available today? Is it just a cultural or a human issue or an investment on their part, or is there some other complexity that I'm just not seeing?
Well, there's a lot of different opportunities out there in the payment system today, and even in the financial technology ecosystem. I mean, if you look at the advent of all the fintechs that have risen over the past decade within this particular space, they're all pointed at certain aspects of problems across the industry. I think one of the challenges has been trying to drive reach. And I think for financial institutions, one of their bigger challenges is trying to grapple with how to change what they've been used to doing to what they need to be doing, which is servicing customers at a service level, not necessarily at a specific product level, which is a different mindset and different change. So I think that leads to some inherent slowness. I think the other thing too, back to the point around really being based in paper-based and batch processes, businesses for the last 40 years have been working on batch processes. So it's not just financial institutions, it's also large businesses, medium businesses, et cetera. And their ability to make those technology investments has been largely stranglehold over the past couple of decades because technology was expensive. Now that technology is a lot cheaper, now that APIs are a bit more plentiful, I actually believe the future is going to come a lot faster for a lot of these folks. And a lot of that's going to be happening within embedded commerce, within embedded capabilities. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, especially with things like FDX and other types of industry initiatives that are focused in on API development, is that a lot of the folks who support these businesses can basically implement this stuff in the back end, and the customer just is able to take advantage and use them. And I think that's going to be the power of the future of what payments and banking holds, is having embedded systems that allow you to just take advantage of these tools without a lot of development and tech spend.
Very cool. So let's wrap up here. I'm going to throw a question at you that we did not rehearse. Is there one thing that you haven't touched on yet that you would like to, mostly for the benefit, not necessarily of you or the clearinghouse, but what do the FSI members really need to know going into 2021?
Yeah, so I think probably a lot of people have said this before me, but everything has changed in this past year. There were things that we have seen tremendous growth in, like contactless payments, remote type payments, buy online, pick up in store. Things that we've been trying as an industry to change for almost a decade at this particular juncture. Many other countries are ahead of us in that. And I think the biggest thing for folks to know in this space is that these are not short term changes. The longer the pandemic has gone on, these have become things that are systemic changes within our society. And that will be one of the biggest drivers toward digital usage and digital technologies and embedded commerce in the future. It really is the fact that we have actually changed the fabric of the way that businesses and humans interact. We've changed the way and the need that people had to be able to do things in a remote environment. And I think what we've also seen is a really great opportunity to simplify and to be able to minimize the amount of process that we have and uncomplicate the way in which things are done. And obviously, the tools, as you mentioned, have been there from a digital perspective for a long time, but the impetus for change hasn't necessarily been as immediate. And I think what's happened within the last year in 2020 is really giving us a great platform as an industry and as financial services in general to revamp, reinvest, and really recreate the experience that our customers need at the end of the day.
Awesome. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.